Taiwan, and we're Chenzi Education Foundation. We're an NPO.
Okay,
yeah,
great.
So we had a Chinese version called Academy online, named Genie Academy. We provide free videos or exercise on the web, and so every child can use it, for free.
That's great.
Yes, and from last summer, we had 3 charter schools in Taiwan. Yeah, and our school Kid Inspire School in Taiwan. Yeah, so that's what we want to do. Yeah, like Kid, we serve the low-income families and child in Taiwan in the rural areas.
Okay.
Yeah, so now there are all the teachers from our schools. Yeah. But now we have 3 elementary schools.
Okay.
Maybe this year or next year we're going to have another junior high school.
Okay.
Yeah. So that's why we come here for learning from you, from some charter schools in America, or learning from you of PL, personalized learning. Yeah.
Great. Fantastic. So your schools have just been up and operating for 6 months?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Wow. How's it going?
And they're all very small schools.
Okay.
Yeah. We have about 200 students of all 3 schools.
Okay.
Yeah, and maybe 40 teachers. Yeah. So.
And the vision is to expand and take kids all the way through.
Yes.
To university. Okay. Wow. Ambitious. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Let me give a little bit of an overview on the school. Ryan's printing out the specific questions that you guys have. So my background, I started as a classroom teacher. I taught in a very low-income community in the South Bronx in New York City. Taught kids that had been kicked out of 1, if not 2 middle schools already. And so got to kind of see firsthand in America, the gross inequities in our public school system. I myself went to public schools, but I went to public schools in Palo Alto, California, which have some of the highest performing and best public schools in our country. A stark juxtaposition to the school that I went and taught at in the South Bronx of New York. And you think about, gosh, how is that possible? These are 2 public schools that should be delivering kind of the same quality of education, regardless of the color of a kid's skin or the thickness of their family's wallet. And so that deeply inspired me to continue to be an educator and think about kind of what's the small role I can play in trying to make the system more equitable. Obviously, it's a massive system with problems at many different altitudes. Before launching New School of San Francisco, I ran Teach for America, which is a teacher pipeline. And so I ran Teach for America here in the Bay Area, and I worked with San Francisco Unified, Oakland Unified, San Jose, so a number of school districts in this area, and thought a lot about how do we recruit teachers, how do we prepare teachers, and then ultimately how do we retain them and ensure they have the right supports.
Actually, we had teaching for Taiwan. Yeah, in
Taiwan,
great. TFT. And two of them are from TFT.
Oh, fabulous, fabulous, great.
I'm from TFT. And
Great.
And one of our school, the teachers are all from TFT.
Okay.
Yes.
Fabulous, great. How big is TFT?
大概现在的话是5届，然后大概300多个老师训练出来。
300 teachers.
Okay, a year. Wow,
Yeah.
great.
No,
Totally.
Oh, total. Okay.
Yeah, we're in the 5th year. Of TFT.
Okay.
So maybe including the alumni, there are 300 people. Yeah, 300 teachers.
Fabulous. Well, so when I was running Teach for America, I had the privilege of spending time in hundreds of different classrooms and different schools, and got to see kind of a full spectrum of different educational models. At the time, I did not think I would start my own school, but started to kind of accumulate this bank of best practices, if you will, right? You got to see, okay, what if we could take this element from this school, and this piece from this school, and this piece from this school, and there is your, utopic, perfect school model. That is not us. That is what we aspire to be. But we are in our 3rd year. We're learning a lot about what works and what doesn't work and what makes it really hard to do personalization, do inquiry, and serve a really diverse population of kids. If it were easy, a whole bunch of schools would be doing it, and there would be, you know, a playbook of how to do this. So we do feel that our model is innovative, not again because anything we're doing is new or different. There's a great body of research that supports all the things we're doing. Great research around personalization, a lot of research around inquiry and deeper learning and creativity and problem solving, a lot of research on the power of intentionally diverse communities, so not just serving low-income students. Yet there are not many schools that are trying to put all three of those pieces together, and that's what we believe is different or innovative, if you will, about our approach. And specifically trying to do that in the context of public education. If we were doing this in the private sector and we could, you know, we'd have more freedoms and could control who our students are, and probably it'd be a little easier. But obviously we are in public education and want to be kind of a laboratory school, if you will, for how what we're learning could be transferable to other schools. And so those, again, are the three big pillars of our model, and I can speak to each one a little bit more. But the first is the equity. And so for us, equity means a few things. One, it means, again, serving an intentionally diverse population of kids. We have students from all over the city. We're not a neighborhood school. And we have students that come from kind of the wealthiest part of the city and the poorest part of the city. Diversity for us also means we have students with learning disabilities, and we have students that are kind of, you might in another school call them gifted and talented and are reading, you know, 2 to 3 grade levels above where they need to be. We have, you know, we're 50% white, 50% students of color, so there's racial diversity as well. And kind of diversity in religion. So any care about diversity in the broadest sense. And that matters a lot because we believe that with diversity brings different perspectives and different life stories. And that adds a richness to a child's understanding of the world and understanding of themselves. And we hope that that helps them build empathy and think about kind of how they are, with that empathy and understanding of difference, how they make decisions in the world. And so that kind of is both that's our first pillar around equity. The second pillar of our model is around inquiry, which Shernice will likely speak more to as our head of curriculum instruction. It's something that really excites me and something that's pretty different from a Teach for America or maybe a Teach for Taiwan. I'm not as familiar with the pedagogy. And different from KIPP's traditional approach. I know KIPP is starting to pivot a little bit and think about deeper learning, but kind of the traditional old school KIPP model is really focused on academic readiness, right? So reading, writing, kind of the rote memorization and the skills and the being able to demonstrate that you've closed the academic gap, right? Yeah. All very important, yet we believe that there's another set of competencies and skills that our kids need to be successful in today's world. The critical thinking, analysis, problem solving, creativity, yes, communication, confidence, and we believe that the best way to get at that is through inquiry. And so that is kind of our curriculum is all around inquiry and problem solving and asking questions. And connecting what we're learning to the real world. And so for us, when I'll give you a sense of what an inquiry arc is, and then again, Shernice is somebody that can answer more specific questions. But I was trained as a teacher to I taught math and science, understand the math and science standards in the state of New York, kind of dissect those standards, build lesson plans, and build a long-term yearly plan. So how are my kids going to learn all of these standards over the course of the year? I mapped it out over 180 days. I had, you know, my diagnostic assessments. I had my end of unit assessments, and I would track my progress. Inquiry, in some ways, almost flips that on its head. Instead of starting with the standards of what kids need to know, we start with big questions. And we call it, instead of calling it a unit, we call it an inquiry arc. And we have 3 arcs over the course of the year. And each arc starts with one of those big questions. And we take kids through 3 phases of learning in that inquiry arc. And all of this also is on our website. We have a great video Shanice did on inquiry, and some example lesson planning templates on how to plan for an inquiry arc. But again, at a high level, kind of the first part of an inquiry arc is called exploration. What do you already know? What do you want to know? Bringing in different researchers, different provocations for kids, field trips. And then the second phase of the arc is called, we call it expression, and it's kind of the sense making. How does this connect to who I am? How does it connect to the real world? How does it connect to what I already knew, what I want to know? And the expression is also kind of the planning phase for the final phase, which is expositions. So given what I've learned and I'm becoming an expert in, how am I going to showcase this knowledge to the rest of the world? Because we believe knowledge is power. And that's also where the social justice piece comes in for us. So we ask kids 2 questions as they head into expositions. How are you going to share this knowledge with the world? And how does this knowledge have an impact on the community? Or how could you have a positive impact on the community? And so all of that is to say, as educators, when you're starting an inquiry arc, you don't know where you're going to be in 12 weeks. And that's really challenging, and it's a very different way to approach lesson planning. You have a sense of the standards you're going to cover, so it's not completely day-to-day. Once you have that big question, you start to pull the standards. And we really start with the science standards and the social studies standard, which we C3 in California, to kind of ground the inquiry arc. But then we build in literacy and we build in the math as well, so that to the extent possible, it's all pretty integrated. It's not perfect. There might be just like some math standards that we have to cover that don't kind of perfectly fit into a weather inquiry. But by and large, our teachers do a really good job of trying to tie it together. So even if in kindergarten, the unit is about weather, but the math standard, for example, is counting. We might be counting raindrops, or counting how long it rained last night, right? So you're still trying to tie it to that broader theme, so it feels relevant for kids. But again, I think that's one of the biggest differences from a curriculum standpoint and a planning standpoint from, again, how I was trained as an educator. I think how most teacher education programs in our country train teachers. And that is the biggest kind of, for most of our teachers, if they're not brought up or haven't taught in an inquiry-based school, it's a big learning curve for them to get up. And you have to release some control and power as a teacher, which can be hard for some people. And be really flexible to say, okay, what questions are kids asking? What are they getting excited about? And then how am I gonna shift, right, this inquiry to follow their line of questioning and curiosity? Does that make sense? And then the third pillar of our model, and then I feel free to jump in with questions if people have them. The third pillar of our model is personalization. And so we never start with personalization or come out and say we are a PL school or personalization is what we do. And we're really clear about why we do that, because we don't see personalization as the what, we see it as the how. Right? So we believe in equity. We believe in inquiry. We believe that these are going to develop the skills that kids need. How the heck do you do that when you've got kids that are coming in at different starting points, have different needs, have different questions they're asking, are curious about different things? So to us, personalization is the vehicle by which we do all these things with kids. It kind of answers the how. Whereas I've been to a lot of schools that kind of come out and say we do personalization, and then I ask them, why or how, and there's not a robust answer to support that. And for us, the personalization is not very technology heavy. We don't use a lot of, an app where a child is logging in and here's what you're working on for the day. For us, personalization really it is very similar to how you think about developing an educational plan for a kid with a learning disability. So in America, it's called an IEP, an individualized education plan for a kid with special learning needs. And we do the same thing for every kid here, and we call it individualized learning plan. And ILP. And basically we go through the same process. So at the beginning of the year, we collect a lot of data on the child, on their reading, math, social emotional learning, their interests, what they're curious about. And then from there, we sit down with parents. The educators come with proposed goals, but we don't finalize the goals until we sit down and have what's called an intake conference with parents. And that happens at the end of the first 6 weeks, after we've collected data and we have an opinion as educators on what goals to set. And we set goals in 5 different areas. We set reading, writing, numeracy, social emotional learning, and inquiry. We monitor progress and collect data in their Spanish ability and their art as well, but we don't set goals yet in those areas.
But how you collect the data from the student without the help of informational tools or technical tools?
We use technical tools. We use assessments.
Okay.
Yeah. And
but
some
not for learning, right? You don't use that for learning? Use tech tools?
Not a lot. In 3rd grade, we've started to. In 3rd grade, we've started to use some apps for reading intervention and math intervention.
Sure.
But I'd say 90%, and that's just in 3rd grade, of the learning is without technology.
Oh.
We use technology for the individualized learning plans to store all the data, but it's only teacher facing.
Okay.
A child doesn't, and our kids are young, we only go up to 3rd grade. So we could shift that as kids get older, but right now a child doesn't have access to their ILP.
Yeah, but if they 可以讲中文吗？就是如果说他们的学习不是
你说他要你的 record keeping 吗？就是怎么知道小孩子的？
对，我是说如果他们的教学不是用 technology 的话，那他收集的这些 data 是就是怎么收集的？那对啊。
So his question was how do you evaluate the children's level and then improve to the IEP the data? I think
yeah, it's a good question.
Yeah.
We use different assessments for each area.
Okay.
So for reading, we use level reading, A to Z reading, which is an assessment that's done in person with a kid. You're reading alongside the kid, they read a passage, but the data is all inputted into the computer. For numeracy, for math, we use benchmark assessments that we've created, but they're handwritten assessments that kids take on paper. And then we have to score them because our math curriculum is also inquiry-based, and we haven't found an app or a technology that does cognitively guided instruction. If you guys have not looked at CGI, that is a great inquiry-based approach for mathematics. Cognitively guided instruction, CGI. I think it's out of the University of Michigan. We've incorporated some Singapore math. So we do a little bit of Singapore math for certain students for whom that's helpful, which is a much more kind of traditional approach to math. But CGI is an inquiry-based approach. I can give you a quick, so how I learned math, if I were to add 21 plus 49, I learned it like this, right? And I would add these two. I'd carry the 1, right?
Yeah.
And then I would add those 2, and I'd get my answer. That's not how we teach kids here.
Okay.
No. So CGI, we teach kids instead, ultimately we can teach them that, but that's not where we start. So we teach them, you line it up, 21 plus 49. And an inquiry-based approach says we want kids to be able to manipulate and break apart numbers to understand number sense.
Yeah.
So a child might go, okay, well I know that 20 is 20 and 1. Okay, so that's easy for me to add. I know that 49 is 40 and 9. Oh, I can do 20 and 40, because that I just know in my head, that's 60 there. And then, 1 and 9, I can do that. That's 10, and so that is 70.
Okay.
It takes longer, but it's developing their conceptual understanding of numbers and how to break numbers apart and put them back together. just one example of CGI. And then what we'll do is, we're more curious, especially at this age with kids, on their process of thinking. So we might ask them to do this, and then we say, great, and that, you got to 70. I want to see 2 other ways that you could have solved this problem. To continue to push them to understand there are different ways. So how else could you break apart 21? Okay, well, I could do 10, 10, and 1. That's another way. And showing their work. That's why on a computer, it's really hard to do that on a computer.
Yes.
I think what we have been seeing past 3 days is all computers.
Yes.
And I'm so happy to hear, because I'm Montessori.
Oh, fabulous.
Yeah. So your philosophy is similar. I believe it's similar because we all focus on hands-on.
Yes.
Not computer.
Yeah.
I really disagree to use computer before third grade.
Yes.
So it's kind of shock for them how you, because each child has their own computer and you tap in and to do the lesson. So teacher immediately knows how to the child's level.
Yeah.
So for them it's kind of shock. How do you do that without computer?
It's a lot more work.
But I believe that's why children.
Okay, I'm still confused. Okay, yes, this kind of the methodology is wonderful. I agree, but since you don't use the technology, probably only say 10%, as you said. But how are you able to track each student progress? Because this one is great, but how do you know each one of your students understand this kind of the thing? And because everyone's cognition is a little bit different, right? So again, I guess there's the occasion. Okay, Vincent asked, how do you track the student data? You depend on teacher to meticulously create the table input as your data?
Yes, we create it. Yeah, so that's why we also have 2 teachers in each classroom.
Oh, okay. One
So
is
2 educators for 24 kids, which adds some capacity to be able to, because it's very time intensive.
Yes.
Yeah.
Is your point? Yes.
Yeah.
And I'm sure there might in the future be a more effective way. With this type of curriculum, though, we haven't found a technology that where kids can solve problems in the way we want them, and we can get insight into their thinking. The challenge we find with technology, if on a computer you just had, this was the problem, and you had option A, B, C, D, and 70 is the right answer, maybe 69, maybe 80. We don't know as educators their thinking.
Yeah.
And so this allows us to have insight into how they solve the problem, because we can see visually, and they need to be able to explain it to us. So one of the best ways we assess kids is sitting down next to them and watching them solve a problem. And so if you have 2 teachers in the classroom, one teacher can be working with, you can do small group instruction, and this gets to the personalization piece. I can be sitting down and watching 3 kids solve a problem and see very quickly, this is what they're struggling with. This is the mistake they're making. And the other teacher might be doing a lesson with kids or working one-on-one with a kid. But the assessments are time intensive.
This traces back to the previous one you were talking about, the inquiry arc. And you mentioned that in order to meet the state standard, you had to teach the student counting. So you have to figure out the other ways to count the raindrops. Okay, it seems like teacher need to create the project, need to figure out what is the best way to teach the student in terms of the cognitive skill, right? Does your teacher have any guideline to do that, or they have to figure out from scratch how to teach the student in the non-traditional way?
They have guidance. So we don't start from, in our first year, we started from scratch. And each grade we're building, so 3rd grade this year, we are creating a lot of those templates and ideas of how to teach it. But now that kindergarten, this is our third year teaching kindergarten, so we have a lot of materials that we're recycling, the teachers are reusing, and we're iterating on it. So what we learned in our first year, this wasn't the best approach to teach counting. It didn't work for many kids. We're using that feedback and tailoring the inquiry arcs. But teachers can use kind of the blueprint of those inquiry arcs. Again, it's going to change depending on, again, what kids are interested in. But there's a skeleton there and what standards we mapped to that inquiry arc that teachers can use over again.
So who create the skeleton? I mean,
Our teachers.
so they have to start from scratch or almost from the scratch?
Depending on the grade level they're teaching. Kindergarten now has the most resources because it's our third time doing kindergarten. And so to that point, we have 3 weeks with our teachers before school starts. And we partner with the Exploratoriums Museum. They have what's called the Institute for Inquiry, and they help us build the curriculum.
Just for curiosity, for all the teachers here, they feel that they have to start to create the project. They treat it as a challenging or they treat it as the burdensome.
I think they have fun.
I think they love it.
Yeah.
Okay, that's good. That's good.
I think it's empowering for them,
Yeah.
and it's exciting to be creative. So we're not, again, where I taught in the biggest district in our country, I was given a scripted curriculum, said this is how you teach math and science. I went to Stanford. I'm a biology, I feel like I'm a pretty smart person and I'm teaching science, and yet then I was given a scripted curriculum and told, here's what you teach on Monday, the first 5 minutes, the second 5 minutes, and this is what you teach on Tuesday. I had no ability to be creative. I was told how to teach in a subject area that I felt like, I'm kind of an expert in this. I studied this for 4 years, and I have creative different ideas of how I could approach it, but I was not allowed to do any of that. And if my principal came in and I was not doing exactly what the district was telling me to do, I would get dinged on my assessments. So I think we're trying to flip that on its head and really empower our teachers to be creators of learning experiences, and provide them with enough support so they don't feel like they have to do everything from scratch. But our theory is if we give educators enough time to plan, to reflect on data, then that work feels manageable, but it also makes me feel like you're treating me like a true researcher and a true practitioner. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So we do 3 weeks before school starts. We do half days on Wednesdays. So kids leave at 1 o'clock on Wednesday. So Wednesday afternoon is all teacher collaboration, planning. And then we do 1 full day each month. No kids.
No kids.
Yeah, once a month. Because again, this is it's time intensive to make sense of the data, where kids are, build lesson plans, adjust your plans, and collaborate. And then we do 1 week at the end of the year as a feedback reflection. So 4 full weeks and then probably at least another week in there. So it's intensive. I'm just gonna shut this door.